My final guest is Clarkstown Councilman from Ward 2, Pete Bradley. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, George.
So, Pete, delighted to have you on board. You're new to the town council. By the time this episode is airing, while we're taping it in January, it'll be airing in, most likely the end of January, February. You'll have been a councilman for all of a month, but you've had extensive community involvement for a number of years in an advocacy role and really trying to kind of galvanize troops with the Preserve Rockland movement. So that, I know we're going to be touching upon that, but be interesting for our residents to kind of get a perspective of who you are as a person. And again, now that we have the ward system in place, there will be folks that will be watching this that don't have the ability to vote for you, as a councilman because they don't live in your ward. But it's important for them to know who their leaders are and who the council people are within Clarkstown. So maybe you could just give a little bit of a background about who you are, where you were born, your family.
Sure. I'll try to keep it short. Born in the Bronx, 1971, moved up here with family in 72. And I've lived in Congers essentially that whole time, from 72 till today, save for a 2-year time span when I bought a condo in Mountain View, and I lived in Mountain View condominiums in Valley Cottage. Currently married with my beautiful wife, Liz. Hi, Liz. My 3 kids, Vincent, Tommy, and Brooks, ages 11, 9, and 5, who I love very much. And currently, my full-time job is with the New York City Fire Department. I'm a lieutenant downtown in Ladder 8. Regarding the Preserve movement, Preserve Clarkstown.
Well, before we get to that, let's ask just and talk a little bit about your time with the FDNY. How long have you been with the FDNY?
Coming on 16 years in May.
And how long have you been a lieutenant?
Over 6 years, 6.5 years approximately.
And you had also had experience, I think, in building inspections as a fire marshal there?
No, I was a fire marshal in the FDNY. The fire marshal primary role is a police officer investigating cause and origin of fires. And if necessary, making arrests if they are incendiary, intentionally set. Building inspection by chance comes when you're actually back in the firehouse. The FDNY does building inspection 3 days a week, Monday. Well, it's different days of the week for each company. But the building inspection is done by the lieutenant captains and firefighters. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So so you have some extensive experience there, and as a fire marshal, so really some police powers that you enjoyed, and kind of a unique perspective and position within the fire department. What made you decide to want to be a firefighter?
Honestly, I had quite a few friends that were on the job at FDNY, and they just kept badgering me to take the test. I never really had a big interest when I was a kid. My father was a police officer, so we never really had a firefighting background in the family. And I graduated college, and I immediately, the day after graduation, went to work for Daimler Chrysler in Tapan on Route 303. And I was a happy camper there until, like I said, some friends of mine started getting hired, and they said, this is a great job, very rewarding, and that I should at least take the test, which I did, followed through, and ended up getting called.
And just, I know that you're very involved with your kids. You coach in the Little League in Congers?
Yes, Congers Little League. Hoping to, technically I manage one team and I help out with a couple of the other teams. Usually I go with my middle guy, Tommy, because the 1 year they were short of managers, it was his level. So I just kept leapfrogging every year with Tom. This year I'm hoping to manage his AAA team. He'll be on AAA this year.
Oh, great.
And Vincent will be in the major leagues, and Brooks will be in coach pitch.
Oh,
yeah.
Brooksy, right?
Brooks, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great to have some council folks now on the board with younger kids. My youngest is 15. I know Councilman Borelli, I think his youngest is either senior in high school or in college now. And but it's nice to that we've got 2 council people now that have pretty young kids. Definitely spices up. I think livens up the reorg meeting. It was nice to see a bunch of kids there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about your what made you run for office. I mean, you started to get involved probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
September 10th, 2012.
And
Yeah.
what
September 7th, rather, 2012.
What made you get involved?
Made me get involved was what's going on back then and what continues to progressively worsen. The county. I was not liking what I was seeing. It actually started off simply enough. I was having a beer with a friend of mine in one evening, and he was telling me all his friends were getting fired from, he works in East Ramapo, telling me all his friends are getting fired. They fired over 300 of his colleagues. I said, why? You know, what's going on? And he started telling me, you know, what's going on with how the money is shifting into the private schools. And he gave me a crash course in about an hour that night. So I said, I got to go to the meeting and see what's going on. I never heard of such a thing, this happening, and you know, not being, you know, anyone taking action to stop it. So I went to a school board meeting, East Ramapo school board meeting. I couldn't believe what I saw. My jaw hit the floor. And one of the people in the audience told me, if you think this is bad, you got to go to one of the town meetings. And that was back when St. Lawrence was at the helm. And it just, by pure coincidence, was the evening when he was announcing that he was raising the town tax in Ramapo over 9% for the upcoming fiscal year. So it was wartime in that room as well. And I said, this is insanity. This is right on our border. These are our neighbors living on our border. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere else in Rockland. And I said, I've got young kids. I've got a house investment to protect. And I grew up in this town, Clarkstown, and I love it. And I said, you know, I got to let more people know. That's the short answer. You know, started having meetings in the VMA in Congress with high turnouts because other people apparently had been worried about similar things. And, you know, then, you know, talking to candidates / elected officials, and it just got more and more involved. At no point did I ever plan on running for a position. Matter of fact, I didn't even know I could run, right, you know, with my current job until I looked into it, you know, at the end of last year. So technically the end of 2016. Right. So that's really how it got going.
So, and I know that you were that group that you were involved with, I guess, was the Clarkstown Preservation Society? Yeah,
Preserve Clarkstown Preservation Society. It was never, it was, you know, more of a, you know, grassroots, you know, meeting atmosphere. There's no true organizational hierarchy or anything like that. It was just people from, you know, Congress, Valley Cottage, New City, a few people from Nanuet showing up and saying, what's going on with our county? Right. Ideally, there was no real deep problems in terms of complaints with what's going on in Clarkstown, except, of course, the high taxes. Right. People were upset about that in Clarkstown. Right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I pride myself on in my first 2 years now as supervisor is that we've really taken some really direct steps to, number one, cut our taxes, which is the first time it's likely ever happened, but at least 30 years now in Clarkstown. Hasn't happened anywhere else. You know, my first year as supervisor, we cut taxes and we held them flat for this year in the 2 budgets that I proposed. So, you know, we have a check on that, but, you know, preserving the character of our community, and certainly that's been something that we've been fairly aggressive with. And that means, you know, looking at our zoning, and we made some changes within our zoning code to tighten it up, to disallow certain uses like commercial uses, you know, industrial uses, and in certain residential zones, houses of worship in certain residential zones, and then also just making sure that we, with our Office of Code Compliance, with our code enforcement initiative, I just looked at the stats, and they're extraordinary for when you look at just the results. In 2015, the year before I became supervisor, the town issued a total of 717 violations. In 2016, after we started the code enforcement initiative and we added code enforcement officers and a prosecutor, you know, in May of 2016, and some code enforcement officers by the summer, we were able to push those number of violations out to over 1,100. And for 2017, after, you know, a full year, you know, with additional code enforcement officers and with a full-time attorney leading the way, we're over 1,500. So we're well over a 200% increase in the number of violations and summonses that have been issued. More importantly, in terms of taking people to court, when we have to go to court, in 2015, the town brought about 50 people to court. In 2016, that number went up almost doubled. But in 2017, that number went up fivefold. We had over 250 cases that went into court where folks didn't get the hint, they got the violation, went to a summons, and then went to a court complaint. And we're seeing real progress there. And that's what the people expect. And I know that in my dealings with folks in the town, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for us to maintain the quality of life here, preserve the quality of life here, and they're looking for us to also make sure that we're making the place affordable. What are some of the major initiatives that you'd like to tackle now that you're a council person, and what are some of the boards and commissions you'll be working closely with?
Well, to me, I'm of the opinion that the thing that's driving voting in Rockland County, and Clarkstown included, is to preserve the character of our community. Like I said, I came up from the Bronx in 1972. Mom and Dad packed me up. Back then I was an only child. I was the oldest, the other children hadn't been born yet. And they wanted to live in a suburban atmosphere. And I do believe that drives most of the voting now as to what's going on with the complete, taking over the suburban atmosphere in Ramapo, where things are getting steamrolled, trees are disappearing, and high-density housing is just being plowed down people's throats. The good folks of Ramapo, who don't want that, which I have complete empathy for. I forgot to say before, it's very important that getting the ball rolling on Preserve Clarkstown 5 years ago was guys from Ramapo, Preserve Ramapo. Bob Rose and Mike Perrietti were very helpful in helping me get off the ground with that first meeting. In terms of the boards that I'm on, I'm the liaison for the planning board, the zoning board, which I'm very thankful for because I think they're the most important boards in Clarkstown, and the alarm review users board as well. So.
Well, it makes sense. Is in true to form, just during the interview, we had the fire whistle go off. So it's I don't know if you called the
cameras caught that.
Yeah. I don't know if you called it in or had somebody call it in, but the alarm review users board obviously makes a lot of sense given your professional background as a firefighter.
A lot of pipes are breaking now because of the drastic weather change.
Right.
It's very warm out today after that cold spell, so they're probably going on a burst pipe.
Right. So the one of the other things that I know that you were also involved with advocating for was the ward system. I know that really was an outgrowth of the battle and struggle in Ramapo that the community advocates up there have been thus far unsuccessful with attaining. But here at Clarkstown, I know that it was your group presented it, brought it forward, and it was put on the ballot to be voted on and passed in 2015. And was implemented by my administration last year to implement the will of the voters. And so this is a unique time in the history of our town because we now have 4 council people that serve 2 years. Those 4 council people serve 2 years and they represent a particular ward. Talk a little bit about your ward, what comprises your ward, and how you think you're going to approach your job as councilman.
My ward has been very active since I've got in there. I get a lot of private messages. I'm very liberal giving out my cell phone, so I get the text messages as well, and of course the emails. I've gotten what's today, January 12th?
Yeah.
Got a lot of people calling me, but I'm taking care of a lot of stuff. It's lucky that I do 24-hour shifts because then I can get rolling to answer the concerns of the residents of Ward 2. But I've made clear during debates, even leading up to the ward vote, the referendum vote, that I represent all of Clarkstown. My votes carry weight for the whole town, and it's the whole town that I'm looking out for. The ward system is unique, though, in that it only permits people in designated geographic areas for voting for one town council member.
Right.
In other words, you can't just sit in the periphery, in the corner of town, and just have complete control to vote town-wide and potentially, amass a voting block to just take over town government. The ward that I'm in is Ward number 2. It represents Congers, all of Valley Cottage, a little bit of New City, a little bit of West Nyack, right along Strawtown Road on the riverside for the most part. Down on the southern end of Strawtown, it does jet in on the western side for a little bit, and then the entire village of Upper Nyack.
Okay. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they reach you?
I have a Facebook page called Pete Bradley for Preserving Clarkstown. My email is pmbradley, BRADLEY, the number 1 at yahoo.com. And why not? The cell phone is 914-772-1244.
Also, they can reach you through the town council office, which is 639-2056.
Correct.
And then your town email address is
p.bradley
at clarkstown.org.
at clarkstown.org.
Right.
And those, by the way, those emails do get forwarded to me immediately when they come.
Right.
I've been getting them too.
Great. So, Pete, I want to thank you for being a great guest. I want to thank you for your service to our community before your election, your service as a firefighter down in New York City, keeping people safe down there for the last 16 years. And I look forward to the next 2 years and working collaboratively with you and the other members of the board as we try and achieve our 2 main objectives, which is keeping Clarkstown affordable and preserving the quality and character of our community.
Exactly. By a mile. Those are the top 2. By a mile.
Great. Well, Pete, thanks so much. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Mr. Supervisor. Thank you.
And we'll be right back.